so, we saw some things like the First Step Act up under President Trump. Can you give us your perspective of, okay, First Step Act was largely focused on the BOP. Didn't really give a whole lot of dollars to federal probation. And I think like people confuse organizations like, oh, the BOP, you mentioned it for the state level, you have the Department of Correction, DOC. Then you have state probation and parole agencies. Sometimes you have states that have state parole and county probation, right?
Yes.
So it's all mixed up. But at the federal level, you have the Bureau of Prison, the BOP, and then you have U.S. pretrial and probation. So what do you think could be added to the next iteration up under the current administration for the First Step Act or the Second Step Act? That part two. What do you think could be added for probation?
Well, actually, you said it. You said expanding it to not just expanding it beyond federal.
Yeah.
And then, in addition to the federal government and in addition to the current administration looking at that First Step Act and determining how it can, breathe more life into it and include more people, right? I think, again, we have to look at it on a local level.
Yeah. That's right.
So the states can't just wait until the federal government hands them some crumbs, right? You have to figure out a way to do it yourself. Every governor in this country should be looking at that act saying, how can I do that on my state's level, right? Because it can be done on your state's level.
Yeah.
So we have to feed the beast, and the federal government can't be all things to all people. Now, again, I would love for this administration to look at giving states, especially the largest states, maybe, I don't know if it's with how you determine if it's with the highest rates or whatever, but look at some states to figure out how you can give some kind of support, financial support to them to kick off something similar to the First Step Act. But it's required of those internally, those people at the county level, because when you think about probation and parole, some of them are not state level, they are county level, even at the county level. And that brings me into this whole issue of, and I don't know if you guys were gonna ask about fines and fees. I know that's a little bit of a controversial thing for people about whether we should collect fines and fees. Again, I'm old school. So when fines and fees became really, really popular, and there was this move to really start collecting the fees, it wasn't to supplant the money given by that government entity for people's employment. That was not the purpose of it. Idea was this money would be put in a separate bucket, if you will, and it would be used to fund those things we talked about earlier, resources for people under supervision. So for example, if you had a person who needed to go to a substance abuse program and they had a sliding scale fee, and he still had to pay $25 each time he went to counseling or whatever, right? And he didn't have that $25. That's what that money could have been used for. Or for someone who gained employment yesterday and this first time getting employment since he's been out, so he didn't have money to get on the bus to go 30 miles to his new job. Bus tokens, right? Came out of that account. But from my perspective, and it's concerning to me that now that money is being put into the regular coffers to supplement salaries. In COVID-19, when fines and fees weren't collected because people weren't reporting, we were all in hiatus, if you will, or hibernating, a lot of departments lost staff members because they were not collecting those fines and fees, and their jobs depended on the collection of those fees.
Veronica going deep on this. Come on, V.
No, she's right on.
That's right. The same number of people were still on probation.
Yeah.
We didn't lose the number of people on probation, but yeah, we're losing staff. Because at the county or the state level, and I get it that some of them couldn't afford the additional money, right? Because they're become so dependent upon that $2 million they were collecting each year from supervision fees. So it's a challenge, but the biggest challenge for me is, again, if you already have people who are struggling and who are suffering, who don't have employment, you're requiring that they pay these fees. Now, believe me, victim restitution, pay victim restitution. I have no problem with that. I think that's the absolute right thing to do.
That's right.
Fines and fees, that's a whole nother story. I just think that in many, many cases, I've seen it myself. Those people are relying on their family members who are not on probation or parole to pay those fees. So there's the collateral consequences this to the family members, and that's not right.
You know, who owns that? I'm sorry, Marcus, I know you got another question, you know, but
I got a comment.
Who owns that failure, right? Like, who do we think? I have my opinions, but I would love to hear both of y'all's opinions on this. But who owns the failure when budgets are cut, right? Or fines and fees are, you know, that people have to reduce the population of officers, not enough fines and fees to go around. And so there's a reduction of officers, same amount of cases, higher technical violation rate, because then officers have to see an enormous caseload. They're overwhelmed, right? It's really interesting to see the fallout from that. And I think there is some unfair blame placed on the officer. But y'all tell me, like, who do you think should have to own that to help bring those resources back to make it more equitable for the officers?
Well, so this is my, and I've said this many, many, many times. So when the first year I was the director of the parole system in Texas, when I was told, you know, the legislative session begins on such and such a date, you know, your criminal justice bill, criminal justice will be taken up on such and such a date, you know, you'll go before and you'll, you know, request your budget be, you know, da, da, da. So, oh my God, I literally began to work with my budget directors for probably 3 or 4 weeks prior to knowing I was going, you know, to get my budget approved, if you will. And the week before that, I literally didn't sleep for 2 nights because I was going through every single line item on my budget, trying to figure out whether it made sense for that amount to stay, or if I needed less in this particular area or more in this particular area. So to your point about this whole fines and fees things, who owns it, what it is, it's to a large extent, I take responsibility for that as a director, because it is my job to go to my budget board. Now, if I go to my budget board and say all of this stuff and give them all of the numbers and all of that, and they still say, go sit down, Veronica.
That's it.
Then I've done my job. But if I go and sit in that seat in those chambers and they says, okay, parole board's budget is up. Last year we gave you $192,500,000. We're going to give you the same thing. And I just sit down and accept that and don't say anything. That's my problem.
See, here's the point.
That's right.
You made a point, and Alicia's going to love this.
Yeah.
Too many leaders are pleading the fifth.
Come on, Marcus.
Too many leaders are pleading the fifth.
Come on.
They don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
We're talking about true transformation. And in 2021, we're still operating with fees.
Yes.
And so let's go full circle.
Wait, Marco, let me say one more thing about that. Hold that thought. One more thing. So what happened when I got there, right, on the morning, and they called up the parole division. So I walk up to the mic and everything. I got all memorized all my stuff I want to say. I've got all my sheets. My budget guys are sitting behind me and everything like that. And they go up and they tell me, okay, last 2 years you got this, da 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 da. Oh, okay, Veronica, we're gonna approve. I'm like, thank you. And the man hit the gavel, and I'm like, when do I speak? He said, oh, no, you don't need to speak. Everything is approved. Just you get the same budget you got last year. I said, no, I would like to speak.
Yeah.
I would like some changes to be made to my budget. But most people don't do that. They just accept budget as is, and they just keep rolling with it. But if you don't fight, if you don't go in and speak up, then you get what you get, and then you can't complain.
Right.
That's why we want to empower practitioners.
Yeah.
Because we go back to the First Step Act, okay? Great job, it did the BOP. But here's the point. Whenever we talk about criminal justice reform, no one talks about probation and parole.
That's right.
There are more people under correctional control, probation and parole, than there are in prison. Prison numbers are going down. Probation and parole numbers are going up. But when you talk about transformation, they don't want to have that conversation. You know why? Because we're not at the table to force it. We have to force those conversations, because I tell you what, we can fund our way out of paying the fees. I am totally against fees. I'm totally against fees. I know why it started. I get it. But to hold someone on supervision because I need your money to collect, because I got to pay staff, to me, is absurd. It's wrong. And we need to call out what it is.
Yeah.
People are saying, well, it is what it is. No, it's not. We can
That's right.
all of that by having conversations and getting different funding streams.
Right.
And that's what we got to do. We have got to properly fund the areas, probation and parole, community corrections, so they can do the jobs they need to do. That's
let me ask you. Let me jump in right there. Let me play devil's advocate a little bit.
Please do.
Okay, good. Because y'all know I'm in Tennessee. We're very fiscally conservative. I'm a proud Tennessean now that I've been here so long. What if there was some type of midway balance, right? Where individuals, and Tennessee, the state of Tennessee does this with proof of indigency, there is a step now. Mm-hmm. And then there was a mandate for those fines or whatever fines and fees to be directly correlated to a programmatic component, to, advanced or secondary education. Something that will likely set that individual up. I'm not saying right or wrong. I would just love to hear y'all's opinion on that, because for some states, it is literally an act of legislation to modify the fines and fees. But what if some of those fines and fees were mandated, or whatever fines and fees was placed on an individual, they were mandated for a program or education or job readiness or technology to help the individual be more successful? What would be your thoughts about that? And if allowable, what would be an appropriate percentage?
Well, again, and one of the things I said early on is when this thing first started, kicked off, that was the focus.
Yeah.
Have money for programs and things like that. So on its face, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed if we came up with some type of a formula, if you will, and some type of specific guidelines around fee collection, not just everybody, you pay $100 a month. Right. More like almost like you do for child support, based on the father's income, you pay a percentage of that, and that's what So if we came up with something like that for people who are employed, I mean, how are you gonna require someone who doesn't have a job to pay these fees? Again, that means his family's paying them. That's not their issue. So if something like that were created, that would be more. That would be more easy for me to accept. Right. What I'm saying. The other part of it, if you think about this whole notion of how much it costs to operate probation and parole officers, and where's that money going to come from if it's not going to come from fines and fees? Guess what? If you reduce the size of these probation and parole departments,
there we go.
That much money.
Hey, you hit the nail on the head. Here's something else for you too. Economic disparities trumps racial disparities because it goes across all.
It's a whole word. That's a whole word.
I use the word Trump. Economic disparities. I mean, it's over racial disparities because it's all people. Economics hits people hard, and we really gotta think differently about the collection of fines and fees, whether you're a conservative or you're liberal. I think there's a better way. There has to be a better way. And I still think, and we all know, that community correction agencies across this country, whether local, state, or federal, do not receive the proper funding that they need to receive.
But again, reducing the numbers, because there are too many people on probation and parole who shouldn't. Number one, I'm not going to say they shouldn't have gotten probation or parole, because that's their way out. So that's a good thing that we have this type of system in place. But the length of the term of probation and or parole in many, many, many cases is way too much. Mm-hmm. You guys have been supervising officers. I mean, I literally had people on my caseload who were on parole for life. If that person is that much of a danger, just keep him in prison for life. Mm-hmm. Why use why have a probation or parole officer who really, I mean, other than, they can still help the person get a job and those kinds of stuff, but that person will never be really free. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's just, we have to rethink the types of sentences. I mean, this goes back to the judiciary. That's another area. I know we can't talk a lot about the judges here. That's always a kind of a taboo.
No, we're not pleading the fifth. That'll be upcoming session.
We're not playing the fifth.
We ain't pleading the fifth. We are having real conversation.
Well, and having this real conversation, one of the things I always say is, if we don't get to the judiciary about all this stuff, we haven't done anything. Because when you consider people that are on probation parole, who puts them on probation parole? Probation, I should say. Who puts them on probation? A judge does. Who decides if they're, especially, I'm not talking about a new offense, but a technical violation, who decides whether their probation is revoked or not? Yes, a probation officer can go before the judge. John Doe didn't do this, this, and this. What's your recommendation? The judge will say, you know, whatever the recommendation is, whether it's to keep this person on supervision with new conditions or whatever, or to revoke this, that ultimate decision still lies with that judge. Oftentimes we know that judges will make the decision in terms of revoking a person, not based on those 3 technical violations I didn't report, I had 2 positive UAs, but he will make it, he or she will make it based on that person's instant offense.
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't want that to come back to them if they, you know, the person stays out.
That's
so
right.
Until we touch on that very tender subject of sentencing and how judges are making decisions, we have a long way to go. There's a gentleman named Brandon Matthews out of Colorado. You guys have probably heard him speak on Brandon. He does this amazing presentation about kind of biases, going to your point, Marcus, earlier about biases. And he gives this example of a white female who gets up, black female and white female, but they both get up. This was done at the Association of Paroling Authorities International Conference a few years ago. He had them both come on the stage. He says, these people are going to tell you about their lives. And then I want you to tell me about, you know, how we can, you know, what should we do to help them or something like that. He says, white female gets up and tell her story. Long and short of it, her story is, I was an awful human being. You know, I came from great parents, but I started selling drugs. I stole, I did this, I did all of these, terrible, terrible things, right? Black male comes up, he tells his story. His story was, he was a Boy Scout. So the mistakes he made were more like, yeah, you know, my parents were probably really disappointed me. I changed my, you know, my what did you major in? Your
college major, yeah.
Several times, and my parents were disappointed, and and all that kind of. Long and short of it, how many people believe the white female story? How many people believe the black male story? Nobody believed the white female story. They thought it was reversed, that she was, you know, she just changed her, just did a few little things like that. And they thought the black guy was the one who was on drugs, who stole from his family, who stole cars and all that. They were both telling their own stories.
Wow.
That's powerful.
That was a room full of parole board members who voted on whose story to believe. Wow, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
You know, I think that's the reason why, you know, what you're doing, and I know Marcus has a couple questions around it, but, you know, you had the brainchild, and I would dare say the guts to have the vision for the racial injustice or the racial justice town halls with APPA, with our last 2 virtual town hall, virtual VTI, Virtual Training Institute. There's a plug there because, you know, APPA conferences are wonderful. You really had this idea, and on the first one, you brought a group of us together, a large group. So we had to break that thing down a little bit more. And then Marcus and some others, Michael Neal, Jeremiah Strongberg. I don't want to leave anybody else, so I'm not going to name names.
Right.
But they continued in part 2 of that. And you know, we talk about not losing momentum, shifting the mindset. It's not just officers that attend the APPA conference. There are parole board members. There are judicial personnel. There are, you know, the supplemental case carrying individuals. And so here you are with this tremendous platform. We have never, can I just say, we have never had the reach that we have had with the Virtual Training Institute. Now we have this reach where people can engage from wherever they sit for an entire week and consume this training. And then you are bold enough in this moment to say, you know what? And take it to the board of directors, the EC, to say, you know what? I think we should have a racial justice town hall. When you talk about that change and reshaping the lens and the inclusion pieces, the racial, I guess, awareness almost of what is going on in today's time. Tell me your thought process about what you thought about, you know what? I have to, as an executive director, I have to bring this forward And not only did she bring it forward, Marcus, if you remember, she was like, okay, now y'all come with your A game, because I'm held us accountable, right?
Right.
Come with your thoughts, but come correct, because it's too important an issue for anybody to be half-stepping. So tell me about how you worked through that, Veronica.
Yeah, so again, it was really easy. And I'm fortunate in this part of my career. And I think as I think about this, even if I were still a practitioner working in a department, I would be at this point. I have fear. I only have time for the truth.
That's right.
And it's time, as my dad used to always say, is go out and be bold and present.
Yeah.
It's time to do that is now. So I know that while APPA has been to a large extent, a very conservative organization and very careful about its involvement in dealings and conversations, if we are supposed to be the quote unquote voice for community corrections, we have to be the voice for all of community corrections, no matter how a person looks, what they believe in, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're right on that first VTI during the racial justice town hall meeting, we had the laundry list. We had women, Black, white, Indian, Nan. We needed to have everybody included. It's such an important conversation. That conversation is so important to me that when the George Floyd, and I shared this with the executive committee also, when that George Floyd matter occurred, I'm like, oh my God, this whole issue of justice system woes is larger than race, but it's really race focused at this time. And it's not just the police department that needs to look inside of itself to determine what it needs to do different. It is all of us. So what I did is I had this just one night, I work forever, so I'm just notes one night, and this thought came to me is that there's strength in numbers. So how do we, this conversation about racial justice, how do I extend that? How do I, as the designee along with the board of APPA, how do I have this conversation with others who are a part of the justice system? What I did is I reached out to probably about 16 organizations that are very similar in focus as APPA, but in other areas of the justice system. So the chiefs of police, the prosecutors association, the pretrial association, et cetera, et cetera. And I invited them to the table to have a discussion around racial justice. Of the 16 organizations I invited, 13 accepted the invitation. And to date, we've had 4 meetings. And what we've done is we've actually come up with kind of what we think our focus is going to be around racial justice. We even gave our group a little name, and I was looking in some of my notes to see if I can, because I don't want to mess that up. But we gave our group a name, and I have it right here. So we call ourselves the Justice System Partnership for Racial Equity. The Justice System Partnership for Racial Equity. Yeah. And one of the things we plan to do is all of us to ensure in our organizations, again, are representative of all of our members, are speaking to those issues that all of our members need us to speak to. And so we're going to start cataloging all of the work we're doing in this racial justice space. And we're going to keep it on somebody's website. And I'm hoping we can keep it on APPA's website. So people all over the justice system platforms can come to our website and see what's the chief of police departments. Noble is a part of it, the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Pretrial, ACA is on the group. Just again, organizations that are professional memberships for people who work in some aspect or component of the justice system.
Hey, Veronica, that's outstanding.
Conversation going.
We got to keep the conversation going. And we've been rolling for a while. So this is why I want to ask you this, because I can ask you 50 million questions, we do this all day. But my question is this: where do we go from here? And there's a lot of things going on. I mean, you talk about the great work that you're doing with APPA and with other organizations, but where do we go from here just to keep this momentum going and keep it alive so true transformation can happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, kind of we've all alluded to it, the fact that we just can't expect the other organizations of the world to do all of the work. And then we sit by and just wait and see what happens. We got to dig in there. I actually have said for example, to some of Van Jones' people, when I go on your website and I look at your board, and I think they do now have, well, I don't think she's on the board though, but she works with them. They've got a couple of practitioners or former practitioners that work in Reform Alliance space. Good news is they have a lot of formerly incarcerated people, and I welcome that. I think that's right. Fantastic, because those are the people who have the real experience, right, in terms of how the system has quote unquote treated them. But what I said to Van's people was, when I look at your board of directors, not one practitioner in that part of your work is focused on community corrections reform. One practitioner on your board, not one. And so we've got to push them to do that. I had a conversation just last week with some folks from Arnold Ventures, with Amy Solomon, and we were talking about something related to our upcoming Executive Leadership Summit. We got on a conversation about criminal justice and community corrections reform and transformation, right? I asked Amy on that call if Arnold Ventures would financially support us bringing a team of people together, because I've been talking about that since last time to get done. I want to bring in a group of people, a diagonal slice of an organization. I mean, from line officer, if there's some resource officers in an organization, we can pull someone from there. I want the middle managers, I want the deputy, I want the chief. I even might want an administrative assistant, because guess what? That's the first person who comes in contact with a person who's on supervision when they walk into our offices. So I want to pull together, I don't know what the magic number is, if that's 21, if that's 12, I don't know, but bring that group together, meet over a maybe 6 to 12 month period, and dig deep into this whole notion of reform. And what I want to come out of that is some true recommendations that we can give to people to use on the local level, as well as all the way to the federal level, to support a move toward change and transforming. And I want to come up with 2 sets of recommendations. One, the short-term things, the things we could do fairly quickly and easily, but need to be done and will have a real serious impact on a positive level. And I also want some long-term things, some things that are going to be maybe require some legislation or some funding and all of those types of things. Amy says, Veronica, send me your proposal. We're going to work on getting some support for you for that. Awesome. So those are the things we have to do. We have to go, you can't, well, what did it say? A closed mouth doesn't get fed.
Okay, that's what Mama said.
You just can't sit back and says, oh, we're waiting for this great stuff to happen in criminal justice reform and community corrections reform. You gotta speak to it. You gotta go to those organizations and says, put us at the table, like you said, Marcus. We have to be at the table to have that conversation. It's great to have people who've done research and the academics to be at the table. It's awesome to have formerly incarcerated people at the table, but if you don't have the voice of the people who really know the probation and parole business, then you got a huge missing link.
Exactly.
You are preaching what we're preaching, and you have our support, because I think if we're able to come up with some lists of some recommendations, local, state, federal, and pass that on from a practitioner standpoint, I know it will get done. And that's when true transformation will happen.
That's right.
Ms. Alicia, what you got?
So this has been a phenomenal conversation. I do have to grab your thoughts on pretrial reform. A lot of conversation, bail reform, a lot of conversation going on. I know we are in alignment with our thoughts, but can you give us your perspective of the importance of that and kind of what you see on the horizons for that?
So thanks for that. I'm glad we're talking a little bit about pretrial. And again, I know APPA is primarily an organization focused on probation parole, but we actually have a lot of pretrial members. And the good news is, in many probation departments across the country, pretrial is embedded in those departments. So for example, in Cook County, when I had probation, I also had pretrial. Also, with respect to pretrial, for a very short period of time, I went back to my home state, to Louisiana, New Orleans specifically, to do some work with the Vera Institute of Justice on a pretrial demonstration project in New Orleans. They were just getting their pretrial organizations started. So I have some really, really strong feelings about it. And I'm so excited about this whole issue of bail reform and everything that's happening, because really, I'm fortunate. Well, I'm fortunate to be still breathing and be so old, but pieces that I left out of my resume is I also worked as a sheriff's deputy for a period of time.
And I didn't know that.
You know that? Yeah.
You.
Yeah. And again, as a leading a pretrial agency that short period in New Orleans. So one of the things that just really, really bothers me is, and actually, you know what I'd rather do? I'd rather share an experience I had in college. So, and that was 500 years ago, but two ladies who were in my suite in dorms, you have like different, how the pods is. There were 4 individual rooms, but we all shared a separate common room, like a little living room area. So there were 2 girls who went out one night to go for a party. And long and short of it is they got stopped by the police coming from the party. They were ultimately both arrested. Police found marijuana in the car. They had been smoking marijuana, been drinking and all of that kind of stuff. So they get arrested, they get, handcuffed, go to jail. And one was white, one was black. The white female was out of jail before you could, she might even got out before the magistrate heard their case the next morning. Mm-hmm. The black female, she eventually got out. First offense, she got a recognizance bond and she was out a couple of days later or the next day or something like that. But to the point of pretrial. Mm-hmm. So you have some people who you can afford to make bond and some people who can't. Those 2 people, the identical situation, neither one had ever been arrested. They were arrested on the same incident. Mm-hmm. One had to stay in jail for a little while. The other one did not. That is a perfect example why you cannot have these bonds on people, cannot afford to pay them. So just because I'm poor, I have to stay in jail. And my counterpart here, my peer here, did the same exact thing, has the same criminal record, none. But that person's treated differently.
Economics.
This whole movement makes total sense.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Bail pretrial is a nice topic that we have some outstanding guests that we're going to really get into. We're going to have a real conversation about that, just like we had with supervision fees.
Yep.
About true transformation. We're talking about the back end of the system with probation and parole and community corrections. Mm-hmm. But if we want true transformation, it starts at the front.
Come on.
It's pretrial and things like that. So don't you dare.
And Marcus, let me say one thing. So, I didn't do a good job of giving that scenario because my point wasn't that one was black and one was white. My point was the white female, and I know them. I've stayed in touch with them over the years. I won't call the names, but the white female, her father was an attorney.
Yes.
He had ways and means. Not only was he an attorney, so he knew the judge and other people, but he had the money.
Yeah.
They said her bail was $1 million. She would have gotten out that night. Mm-hmm. Other female, the black female, and again, I didn't really mean that to be a racial issue. It was about means, really. That's what it was really about.
Well, I would say it's both. I would say it's economic and it's racial. I would just go on the front page to say that and endorse that because that is what it is. I mean, and we've seen the stories where, especially out of New York, where a guy didn't get bond and sat in Rikers, ended up hanging himself. And even actually with the court, he wasn't got any time, but he sat in jail for over a year in admin seg for his case to be called up because he couldn't afford bond. I mean, this is a real issue that affects communities of color. It affects those who cannot pay. So I cannot wait to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm super excited about you guys having this podcast. I'm so thrilled and honored that you guys included me as your first guest. I mean, there's just so many different layers of this that can be talked about. And I hope that at some point down the line, you guys really engage some of those organizations that are not related to the field. Like I gave the example of AT&T, get some of those organizations in. And because one of the things I'm trying to do now at APPA is really knock on the door of non-traditional funders for us. And again, My goal is not just so that APPA will have a nice amount of money in its coffers, but to use that money that's coming from those organizations to better train probation and parole officers. I'd love for it to be a day where we have probation departments that have never sent people to an APPA conference because they don't have a training budget. They certainly don't have a travel budget. For us to say, we've got scholarships. We will pay for 3 nights at the hotel. We will pay for your registration fee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We got to get that. And when I say bring those companies in, so one of the things we're doing is some research around companies that are starting to kind of see the light, but there are a lot that have not. The bell hasn't gone off, if you will, for them. I was watching television yesterday. There's a woman who got out of Rikers Island, a white female who did, I think, 5 years. Her sentence was 5 years. I don't know how much time she did. She was impersonating like a rich person from Germany, and she was engaging in these conversations with these banks, trying to get money from them. So she was acting like she was in high society in New York, and they found out that she was really a fraud, right? So she went to prison. I learned on yesterday that Netflix, now that she's out, she's just been out a couple of months, is going to pay her to do a documentary about her story. And she's already been given an upfront advancement, I should say, to do a book around those things. So, faking like you're rich is extra stuff afterwards. And you have people who have more compelling stories, right, about their time before prison and during prison, and they don't get that. So again, I think there's still that stuff that companies don't really get. We got to help them get to that.
Yes.
Right. We got to help them get to that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been, I've learned things about my friend that I didn't know. We've got wonderful perspective. To all of our viewers, you can see why it's so exciting to see kind of the evolution of APPA, because we have dynamic leadership. We have, people who are passionate. We have a passionate leader forging ahead. And I will say, Veronica won't brag on herself, but I will brag on you. You have helped to transform. We talk about transform. That's right. Really, you have helped to transform APPA to be an organization that's a resource for officers, middle managers, supervisors. I remember, leading the Division of Probation and Parole. My first time coming to APPA was when I was in that role. Now, mind you, I had been a federal probation officer, but had never been reached out to, right? And so it was just that, the passion that your one-on-one approach. We certainly appreciate your work, your effort, what you do on a national scale. You sit at some amazing tables nationally and internationally, and you just do a great job. And we thank you for that leadership, because that lays the groundwork for more transformation to come in the future with organizations, individual organizations. So thank you to all our listeners. Marcus, I'm gonna let you close us out.
Hey, look, I'm excited. This is what the fifth is about. Yeah. Real concrete conversations with pioneers in our field. And Veronica, Deputy Sheriff, I was shocked. I didn't know that. I thought I knew a lot about you. Didn't know that. But this conversation is really about how we can transform the system more equitable and make it better. And like I said, it's to empower practitioners to lead the change, because that's when true change is going to occur. I thank you for your knowledge. I'm gonna give you one more thing. I thank you for your knowledge. I thank you for all the advice, the information that you gave us. And I'm not going to close this out. I'm going to allow you to close this out. So it's on you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So you guys have said such kind words. I really appreciate it. But, we're all in this together. So, when I think about reform and transformation, I think that for us to have true impact, to have the maximum impact, it can't be one dimensional. The efforts cannot be one dimensional. There has to be really a multi-pronged approach to it. We have to look at it from a policy and legislative standpoint. We have to look at our inside, our practices and our business model, if you will. We have to look at it from a technological standpoint. What are some of the solutions out there that are going to help to translate this to the people that we need to support? We have to look at it from a scientific transformation, kind of like looking at evidence-based practices. And we have to share knowledge. So it's all of those things mixed together in collaborations and partnerships. That's the only way we're going to be able to get to the end result and meet our goal and have more success stories. So thank you guys for having these conversations. I appreciate you being on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
you.